welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. One of the great mysteries of life with which many of us find ourselves grappling is how to distinguish God's voice from the cacophony of calls and impressions going on continually all about us. One example of a child who found the answer is Hannah's son Samuel, who was dedicated from childhood to serving God in the chores that daily took place in Israel's tabernacle. 1 Samuel 3, Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel, and he arose and went to Eli, and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Therefore Eli said, Go, lie down, and if he call thee, thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place, and the Lord came, and stood, and called. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. For this boy, there was no vision or angels as other prophets had had. Instead, there was a voice. So human-like, Samuel mistook it for being the high priest Eli, and ran to his bed. Now that's a pretty picture of cheerful obedience to the wants of an old man, without begrudging the broken sleep, which had probably been similarly interrupted many times. Maybe it was a child's task to wait on Eli as well as tend to the golden lamp and maintain the shewbread. When reading this, we may ask, where were Eli's sons? They should have been attending their father, but they were away partying, so that the care of both tabernacle and priest was left to a child. But never mind, the old and the young are good companions for each other, and often understand each other and help each other more than those who are busied with less important matters in life. Samuel mistook God's voice for Eli's. You and I are subject to the same error, and on the other hand, just as likely mistake Eli's voice for God's. We must have a very attentive heart and an ear, purged from selfishness and self-will, and ready for obedience to know when God speaks, though people may be his mouthpieces, and when people speak, though they may tell us their messages from God. The child's mistake was not a deadly sin. It is less pardonable and more dangerous if we make a practice of repeating it. If we would safely guard against it, we need spiritual guides to teach us how to distinguish God from man. And most of all, we must watch and be sober. Eli's perception that it was God who spoke may have had a pang in it. It's not easy for the old to recognize that the young hear God's voice more clearly than they, nor for the person who has become accustomed to being superior to be glad when he has passed over and new truth dawns on those who are destined to be leaders in a new generation. But if Eli had any such feeling, it was silenced with beautiful self-abnegation, and he told the wondering child the meaning of the voice and the answer he must make. What higher service can any man do to his fellows, old or young, than to help them to discern God's call and how to obey it? What nobler conception of a teacher's work is there than that? Eli heard no voice, from which we may probably conclude that, however real the voice, it was not audible to the ears of whoever happened to be in the tabernacle that night. But Eli nevertheless used the opportunity, as God surely intended, to teach Samuel to interpret and answer the voice which he heard, and thus won some share of a prophet's reward. With what expectation in his young heart Samuel lay down again in his place. This time more happened. The Lord came and stood and called, but there was no terror nor recoil from the presence. The child's simplicity and purity saved him from that, for his little life had been a growing in service and in favor with God and man. The answer, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth, meant far more than the child knew. It is the answer which we all need to make. It expresses the entire surrender of the will to the will of God, which is the secret of all peace and happiness. The world passeth away, but he that doeth the will of my God abideth forever. May we follow God's voice the same way.
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.